Hmm? Gary. Good morning, everyone. As we start the lesson today, I want us to think about home and what those four letters mean to us. Think about this for a second. When I think of home, my first thought is blank. What comes to mind when you think of home? Comfort. That's a good one. Love. Family. Rest. Unless you've got a lot of work to do at home, which I can relate to right now. Food, yes. What else? Safety, safe space. Those are all really important things that I think we all associate with home, and I hope we all do. Those are all positive things, so I hope that we all associate to that or with those things, and what it means to long for home or to want to go home or be home. One of the things that I was using when I was researching for the lesson today was the online service that the commentary that we use has, and it was talking about the pandemic and how that forced so many people home, and people were home for an extended period of time, and people were working from home and just spending a lot more time focusing in some cases on what was really important to them, or changing their focus in general with all the things that were going on and still continue with the pandemic. So it talked about people in New York City, for example, when everything locked down and you have those high-rise apartment complexes, and you think about how everything was so locked down and people were stuck in their homes, and in their case, it's smaller apartments that are in a building with, could be thousands of people, at least hundreds, but probably thousands of people in that one building, and they couldn't go outside and walk around. You know, they didn't live in an area where they had any, that wasn't just one house on a piece of property, so they couldn't go walk around outside and get freedom from that space they were in. They were stuck, basically. They could maybe get to the grocery store or whatever, maybe, but then they're using elevators or stairs to go up and down. And I've thought about that often. I've always enjoyed going to the big city and going somewhere that has the excitement of a big city. But when I was thinking about home, I would rather be somewhere where I have that space and that ability to be at home and be safe. And in this commentary, it talked about how with a pandemic, people have been trying to get away from something. People in these big cities have been trying to get away from that crowdedness or that relax or focus on what was really important with their families. And so they've been flocking out of the city in some cases to other areas. And they've also had the benefit of working remotely, so they could leave maybe the city where their office always was and go somewhere more out into a rural area or somewhere they could actually have their own property and that sort of thing. So people wanted to live their best life by moving away from something. And in today's lesson, we're talking about going towards something to live our best lives. We're in Psalms, and for the psalmist who wrote this particular message today, you have to picture him being in ancient Israel, and for him, pursuing the best life meant moving toward the temple, really. That was, Old Testament, so it was before we had the indwelling of the Holy Spirit for us, and so he really missed being in the church or in the temple, what we think of as the church today. And he even admires, as you'll hear in the lesson in a minute, he admires the swallow, the tiny little bird who can build his nest inside the temple, and he can be close to God in that regard. So he's trying to get to something where the folks in the pandemic are trying to get away from something in most of the cases. So as we listen, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be and why? And then also think about, when have you taken a big step back and reevaluated what's important in your life? A lot of us have probably done that in the last year or so because of the same things, the pandemic and the changes that's made. But keep those in mind as you hear the lesson this morning. And then what do you do when you feel a desire to move closer to the Lord? What are some steps that you take when you're trying to get closer in that same situation. To give you some background, we're in Psalms 84. That's the whole lesson today is Psalms 84. And they're not sure exactly who wrote this particular psalm. Some people think it could have been David because he wrote so many psalms. Some people think that it may have been one of the descendants of Korah. And just to give you some background on who Korah was and why that might be important. Korah was actually a descendant of Kohath, a son of Levi, but he, along with some other people, led a rebellion against the authority of Moses and Aaron during the Exodus. So they were actually anti-Moses in that group. And because they had this rebellion against Moses and his family and team, he was put to death along with 250 other people because of that rebellion. So that makes you wonder, well, why would somebody related to him write a psalm, right? Why would this bad guy, if you will, write a song? And it says, despite the blemish on the family line, his descendants became prominent in the temple worship that King David arranged before his death, getting closer to when Solomon actually built the temple later. And it mentions that Korah's descendants ended up being gatekeepers for the temple, so they were very important in that they opened the door. I thought of Odell this morning when he was ringing the bell as I came in, and I thought about him being kind of our gatekeeper here. You know, he's here first, he's here last, he's the one who makes sure everybody can get in the gate to come into the temple. So I picture these folks that are part of Korah's descendants being sort of like that. They had this really important role of making sure things are ready and the right people are coming into the temple, or the people can enter the temple or exit the temple. So anyway, there's some debate about who actually wrote it, but I wanted to give you that background because I wasn't familiar with Korah and all that history when I was reading this. And for the beginning of the psalm, it actually has sort of a little super actually start, and that's a little different too. It says, for the director of music, according to Gittith of the sons of Korah, a psalm. So it's saying it's for music, and if y'all want to sing this, feel free to put it to music while we're talking this morning. But it says Gittith may be some type of musical instrument, but it's geared, for these folks. Verse 1, how lovely is your dwelling place, Lord Almighty. And they talk about lovely here in the commentary being like beloved, being really important, not just pretty, but just being a really special place. No place the psalmist would rather be than this place. In verse 2a, my soul yearns, even faints for the courts of the Lord. That's pretty extreme words, right? Do you ever faint because you're so excited about coming to church? Do you yearn so much to come that you faint at the prospect of either being excited about it or not getting to come? But it's talking about the absence, the fact that this person couldn't get to church or couldn't get to the temple, and the absence that it had on him. And I thought about this with the pandemic too. Sorry to tie all that into that, but I thought about when everything stopped, when you couldn't come to church there for a little while until it was figured out that you could come outside. But that was such a weird time, that you couldn't come in person to do things. And there's a little story within the commentary called Your Fainting Heart that ties in with the fainting reference. It says, no one wants to faint on their wedding day, but the excitement of the big day can make the bride and groom lightheaded. You see things on America's Funniest Videos sometimes of bride and grooms passing out, falling out. And that's why, as a minister who's presided at many weddings over the years, I give the excited couple and their descendants 2 pieces of advice at the wedding rehearsal. First, hunger makes you faint, so eat something prior to the ceremony. Second, rigidity makes you faint, so bend your knees slightly instead of standing ramrod straight while in front of the audience, and those are both true things. But it asks, have you ever yearned so deeply for the presence of God that you felt like you were going to faint? Consider again my 2 pieces of advice. If your soul feels faint, maybe you're hungry and thirsty for righteousness. Feast on God's word. Or maybe you need to bend your knees, physically or spiritually, before the Lord to prayer. What will it take to revive your fainting heart? And I thought that was a nice analogy between the the hunger and the bending of the knees and the things that we need to do as Christians to stay close to God. In verse 2b, my heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. So he's crying out. It doesn't say we're celebrating, we're leaping and jumping and praising God. It says it cries out. So my heart and my flesh. It's very intense, whatever this person who's writing this feels. And one of the commentaries about it, it talks about thinking that it is David and that it's after David couldn't be part of the group. When he was, what's the word I'm looking for? He was basically sent out with Absalom, all those things that happened with him, ostracized, I guess, for a little while. And some of this sounds sort of like David might say, if he can't come into the he's having, may make sense that he is the writer. In verse 3a, even the sparrow has found a home and the swallow a nest for herself where she may have her young, a place near your altar, Lord Almighty, my King and my God. So here's that reference I mentioned about the bird, the little tiny sparrows. This person is jealous really of the birds and wants to be that close, wants to be, intimately linked to the temple like these birds are. And it mentions where he says, Lord Almighty, my King and my God, the possessiveness of my King, my God. It emphasizes God's greatness and, that the depths of love this person's, willing to go to here. In verse 4, blessed are those who dwell in your house. They are ever praising you. So again, people who are spending a lot of time in the sacred surroundings. They're there, they're enjoying. It says when they honored the Lord by faithfully carrying out his work, the house was indeed a blessed place to be. Of the temple to the church today, one's making to